I came away from watching film and highlights of Penn State's spring game bewildered. I think that there should be an extra asterisk next to Penn State's spring game, and this is where we will begin in my analysis of Penn State football. Penn State's spring game was interesting, and it was intriguing, and as much as the people who are Nittany Lion fans, analysts, just casual fans, mentioned Drew Allar and the concerns about him and his wide receivers, I have a more mixed, I think balanced reaction to that, because Drew Allar, while showing some signs that he's a green player and that there can and will be struggles, he also showed his insanely high upside both in the run game and the pass game. He showed why he has Josh Allen comparisons. He just did. But what I want to start out with is the fact that spring games aren't meant to be used as the ultimate measuring stick in the preseason. Now, in the preseason, you have a limited window anyway, but you can make that window wider or less foggy by including spring practice reports, by looking at different metrics, whether it's Bill Connolly's S&P returning production or just S&P plus rankings, whether it's studying the depth chart and then looking at the statistics of the players on that depth chart, watching specific film for the previous season or previous seasons for different players that are still on the team. Doing all of that, doing your homework, gives you a wider window. But for Penn State, if a spring game was to be used as a measuring stick, and it can, it's part of the measuring stick, it should be even smaller than other teams' spring games. It really should be. It just should be. And the reason for that, I think, is there are a lot of unknowns. Dante Cephas, who's the biggest impact transfer for Penn State, in my opinion, is still not there. And Drew Allar is a quarterback that, even if you look at Kyle McCord, who's going to be a first-year starter at Ohio State, he's been there for 2 years. And he's played in multiple games with the Buckeyes. He even started once against Akron in 2021. So there's more to be known about Kyle McCord than Drew Allar. And also Ryan Day and Ohio State have a reputation with quarterbacks that no one else in the Big Ten, Penn State included, has. So there are some more unknowns there. And to make a comparison again to the Buckeyes, even though Ohio State had a lot of injuries, they're the players that we're familiar with. Travion Henderson, JTT, I don't know if he was injured or not, but he didn't play at all in the Buckeyes spring game. I'm pretty sure he was injured, though. And Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming. Those are players that got significant playing time, and we know how good they are from watching them in 2022 and beforehand. For Penn State, there are still unknowns. More of them. And now that's just my opinion. But Dante Cephas, you insert him in the spring game or just on the team, period, some of those receiver problems will just go away. Because he's a good player. He was, I think, Kent State's best wide receiver. Good player. Sean Lewis knew what he was doing at Kent State. He knows what he's doing now at Colorado with his offense. Like, Dante Cephas is going to be your wide receiver one, like what Parker Washington was this year, what Jahan Dotson was the year before. That is what Dante Cephas is going to be. Penn State doesn't even have their best wide receiver yet. Huge limitation. And then quarterback isn't a limitation, but there's just so much that's not known yet. Because having Dante Cephas on the roster will help with Drew Allar's statistics and help with his play. It'll give him a better supporting cast. But also Allar in himself is a huge unknown. If you were to line up all of the projected Big Ten starting quarterbacks, Allar would be toward the bottom when it comes to experience, and therefore when it comes to us knowing who and what he is. We don't know that much yet. Whether you're a Penn State fan, or whether you're like me, a Michigan fan, or whether you're just a casual college football fan. So, There are some limitations there. But with that, I do have, and really those limitations, despite being small in number, they're big in implications. I mean, Dante Cephas is an impact guy, and Drew Allar could be the reason why Penn State underwhelms and goes 9-4, or he could be the reason that they reach the college football playoff for the first time ever. Though I think schematically, and due to the fact that I think Allar this year is going to be more in a developmental stage than an elite stage, I think he won't be the main guy on offense. I think that'll be up to Singleton and Allen, but we'll see. Again, there are some unknowns. But with Penn State football, there's one simple phrase that I could come away with from watching their spring game. The defense obviously played amazingly. Manny Diaz, for sometimes as much flack as I give him, has an elite defense. This defense is top 10. They're also extremely deep, especially at defensive line, but even more so, I think, at linebacker. And they will have a good secondary. I mean, Kalen King will be one of the best defensive backs, corners in the country. No doubt about that. Rated very highly on PFF, had several pass breakups and tackles, just an overall good player. But for all those good things, and also the bad things, looking at the offensive line, run game, quarterback inaccuracies, combining all those things, keeping in mind that this is a very small window, I can be confident in saying the phrase that this team is not beating Ohio State or they are not beating Michigan. They aren't. And if they end up doing so, well, that's just a bad preseason take of mine. It is. And I will go over that, and I will stand up. I will stand up and take responsibility for that. But looking at this spring game, and looking at Ohio State and Michigan's spring game, looking at the fact that the Buckeyes and Wolverines return more than the Nittany Lions, they have a better track record in recent memory of development, of schematics, of execution, and just being better overall football teams and having better records in top 10 games, I don't think the Nittany Lions are beating either the Buckeyes or the Wolverines this year. Definitely not in a neutral field. Now they get Michigan at home. So that's, of course, tricky because Beaver Stadium, that's a stadium where the difference between Penn State at Beaver Stadium and a neutral field might be close to 10 points, which is a pretty huge swing. Beaver Stadium is that intimidating. It's tough to play at. I have been there personally, the 2021 Penn State-Michigan game, and that was not a whiteout, and that was still, you could tell, it was extremely tough for Michigan to play in that environment. And that wasn't even a whiteout. That wasn't as tough to play in as it was if you were Michigan in 2019 or Minnesota in 2022 or Auburn in 2021, just as a few examples out there. But this team, they're not strong enough on the offensive line. They're just not strong enough on the offensive line, and I don't think they have the experience at quarterback yet to test consistently a defense like Michigan's or Ohio State's. And defensively, Manny Diaz's defenses are good. They're great. Sometimes they may seem elite, but look at Ohio State and Michigan last year. And look at his defenses at Miami. When they face, and this is the case with 95% of defensive coordinators, so this is not a knock on Manny Diaz. This is just simply me saying that he is not an S-tier defensive coordinator. And Penn State doesn't have the talent of Alabama or Georgia either. So the level of coordinator they have matters even more because the talent can't compensate for bad coaching decisions as much as maybe Georgia's or Alabama's or even Ohio State's roster or Clemson's can on defense. They have nice players. They have Chop Robinson, Dani Dennis-Sutton, Adisa Isaac, Abdul Carter, Kobe King, Kalen King, Curtis Jacobs, Daquan Hardy, Johnny Dixon. They have really neat players. Kalen King is one of my favorites. Dani Dennis-Sutton, 5-star defensive player, who was a 5-star in the 2022 class, along with Nicholas Singleton and Drew Allar. That was a 3-headed monster of guys who I thought were going to be potentially all three impact freshmen. Nicholas Singleton, instant immediate impact freshman. Drew Allar did get some playing time. Dani Dennis-Sutton was third on that list if you were to look at playing time. But defense, Penn State has great players. And defensively, they dominated Penn State's O-line. I mean, the first team defense shut out the second team offense, and the second team defense gave the first team offense numerous problems. You could not run on Penn State's defense at all. You couldn't do it. It was hard to pass on them. They were constantly getting in Allar's or Purbala's face. It's a good defense, and Manny Diaz is a great defensive coordinator. But remember this. When that defense faces an offensive line that is a few tiers above Penn State's O-line, when they face a running back room that is just as deep, that is just as good players, if not potentially better, when they face wide receivers from Ohio State or tight ends from Michigan that can match up well with their defensive backs or linebackers, and when they face J.J. McCarthy or Kyle McCord, this defense, like Manny Diaz defenses when they face elite offenses, that will be the true test of what they are. And I do not think that they will pass that test. But that's less of the concern on defenses compared to offense. Defense mowed the offense down. The offensive line, I still think, look, it's spring. A lot of problems, just like at quarterback and wide receiver, will be worked out. This team is a top 10 team. And this is a team that definitely could go 11-1, could potentially even go 12-0. And then they could be a national title team. They have that potential. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think people who say that this team is incapable of reaching the playoffs might need to check their oxygen intake. Like, they have the talent, 4 stars, 5 stars. They fulfill the blue chip ratio. They're using the portal enough, though I think they should take the lead of Michigan and Ohio State and use it a little more. And they have good enough guys to recruit and develop players on the coaching staff. And I think James Franklin this season rehabilitated some of his reputation after having a bad 2020 and 2021 campaign. But that doesn't leave the team without issues, without questions, and without the fact that I think it's a year too early to say that Penn State's going to win the Big Ten. Now, when Michigan loses a lot of their starters, and Penn State's top 15, top 10 recruiting classes that they've been pulling are more mature, and they're able to have more impact, and they get Ohio State, who, just from projections, will probably be the best team in 2024, maybe then we can look at 2024 and say, and predict this team to win the Big Ten, and maybe even reach the playoff or win a playoff game, and we can predict that with some confidence. But I can't do that this year. And it's not because of Allar, it's not even because of the wide receiver room. I think those things, those people, those players, those rooms will look better come fall. Drew Allar actually, to me, looked better than I thought he was going to look. So, from a quarterback standpoint, I like Penn State more than I did before this game. And wide receiver-wise, I don't know enough to make a prediction there, because Dante Cephas isn't there. But the offensive line got manhandled by a D-line that lost P.J. Mustipher. And even though they have some players, they got manhandled by a D-line that, look, Zach Zinner and Trevor Keegan just by themselves pushed over that defensive line. And Ohio State was able to, not to the same degree that Michigan did when running the football, but C.J. Stroud had one of his most effective games all year against that Penn State defense. Penn State's defense, schematically, but also from a player standpoint, I just don't think is there yet. I don't think they are. They don't have the same Brent Pry feeling to them. They don't. And that's something that I can't exactly qualify or quantify. So if you disagree with that and you list all your evidence below it, feel free. And there's a good chance you're right. But looking at this team, and how we know that Penn State's O-line has been one of their consistent weaknesses in the Franklin era, both from a developmental standpoint and from an on-field collegiate standpoint, and looking at how Penn State's offense has functioned last year. Nicholas Singleton was a non-factor practically in both the Michigan and Ohio State games. Kaytron Allen had a good game against Ohio State but did nothing against Michigan. And you look at the fact that Penn State gave up a combined 85 points to the Buckeyes and Wolverines last year. Their secondary loses a good chunk of players. They lose a good anchor in PJ Mustipher. I don't see how this team is... I think it's nearly impossible that they're going to beat both the Buckeyes and Wolverines. It's hard for me to have any confidence behind a prediction that says they'll even beat one of them. And that's because, Ohio State has only lost once to James Franklin in James Franklin's tenure there. Ryan Day has kept up that winning streak against Penn State that he couldn't against Michigan from Urban. And Ohio State, they host Penn State this year. They outclass them at nearly every position. Believe me, Ohio State's defense is going to be a much better unit this year than it was last year. Year 2 of Jim Knowles' scheme, return a lot of their production, and their offense will always be rolling under Day. And they have a massive talent advantage over Penn State from high school recruiting, just like they do over Michigan. And for Michigan, it's this. Michigan reloads at O-line. They might even get better at every position at O-line outside of center. I think that Olu Oluwatimi is better than Drake Nugent, but we'll have to see. Michigan reloads at tight end. They'll get better at wide receiver. They'll get better at running back. J.J. McCarthy will mature. And they add guys on defense too via the portal. The defensive line, linebacker room. I mean, Michigan should have a easily top 5 defense in the nation next year. They're that deep, and they're elite at all 11 positions. They are elite except at the one corner spot opposite of Will Johnson. It's their sole weakness. So you look at all of that, and what I came away with from Penn State's spring game, and the reason I talk about Michigan and Ohio State so much is because that's what's being said about this team. Like, this is the year, or is this the year that Penn State finally gets the best of the Big Ten East again, like they did in 2016? Or is this the year where Penn State finally, for the first time in the Franklin era, beats both Ohio State and Michigan in the same season? Is that the year? That's what's being talked about this team, so it's appropriate to compare it with the two teams that have been consistently better than Penn State for the entire existence of the Big Ten East and West. This team is a really good football team. They're a great football team. They are a great, near-elite football team with elite potential. They're in my top 10 for a reason, and I'm 99.9% sure they are not going to drop out of my top 10, let alone drop outside of my top 8. But I think that looking at things, I think that there's a lack of experience at quarterback that plays to the advantage of the Buckeyes and Wolverines. Michigan has the better running back room. Ohio State, if healthy, has the potential to have the better starting running back duo. I certainly think they have the deeper running back room if healthy. And Michigan and Ohio State, their guard play, their interior O-line play is definitely going to be better. The strength of Penn State's O-line is Olu Fashanu. That's the strength of their offensive line, is tackles, Olu Fashanu, and in theory, pass protection. And even that was a little bit sketchy in the spring game. The run game, Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen did not do much in the spring game. They had some nice moments. Kaytron Allen, there was one time where Drew Allar was pressured immediately. He somehow escaped it by almost sprinting backwards and then accurately threw a check down to Kaytron Allen. That was a good play in my mind from both of those. Allen having the awareness to not give up on the play, and Allar having the awareness to just get out of there, and him having the arm strength to, while backing up and not having his feet set, throw that ball. Drew Allar, in my opinion, was actually one of the highlights of the spring game. He was able to run the read option. If we're to compare him to J.J. McCarthy or Kyle McCord, I think he's better at running the read option now than either McCarthy or McCord are. McCarthy struggles with properly reading the option and when to pull it, and McCord just isn't mobile. But Penn State's run game, and this is good on Allar, not good on the offensive line and running back room, I thought the quarterback run game looked better than the running back run game. And if Penn State's defense can do that to Penn State's run game, what will Jim Knowles' defense do in year 2? And what will Michigan's defense do as it practically reloads at every position? Ask yourself that question, honestly. This isn't a knock on Penn State. They're a top 10 team. They would destroy 100 different football programs, and they'd probably beat all but anywhere from 4 to 8 teams in the country. They would beat on an average basis. They're a great football team. They'll go to a New Year's Six Bowl. Knowing James Franklin, they'll probably win a New Year's Six Bowl. And there's a good chance that this can be the first time James Franklin gets a 12-win season. There is a possibility that Penn State goes into Ohio Stadium and in a clutch matchup wins and comes out of Columbus with a win, which they couldn't fulfill in 2017, and they avenge that game. There's a chance that they avenge a close, nail-biting loss to Michigan in 2021. And when Michigan enters Beaver Stadium in November, the crowd's roaring, Nicholas Singleton or maybe Drew Allar himself breaks off on either a run up the middle or an option and takes it to the house, or maybe Drew Allar throws with his impressive arm strength a deep ball, and Penn State escapes Michigan at home, and the crowd storms the field. There's a chance that those things happen. I'm not saying this is impossible. I'm just stating my reaction. The Nittany Lions are improved compared to what they were last year, but I think Ohio State and Michigan equally improved, if not improved more than the Nittany Lions did to their counterparts from 2022. So that puts Penn State in a tough position. That puts Penn State in a position to, while they will be a better team compared to 2022, they'll have the same identical record, which will be painful. But I think, just like I said with Texas last year, I think Texas is a year too early last season to call them Big 12 title contenders, let alone college football playoff contenders. And Texas and Steve Sarkisian survived 2022, and now I think not only will they win the Big 12, but they could very well contend for the college football playoff, and they'll be CFP contenders in November with their schedule. For Penn State, I think it's a similar thing. I think, just wait, I think 11-2, 10-3, maybe 11-1 regular season, and whether the tiebreaker favors Penn State and they go to Indy, or they go to their New Year's Six Bowl game at 11-1, or pull Ohio State and get into the playoff with an 11-1 record despite not winning the Big Ten. Just take it. Penn State's going to be a great team, and I think in 2024 is the chance where this team will be national title or bust kind of caliber. They're young. They have some inexperience at key positions, but they also have some experience at key positions, an experience that could be maintained and that could decide to return for what I think will be Penn State's best chance to capture the conference, which will be in 2024. So thank you for listening. Comment your thoughts down below. I know there are going to be people who are going to disagree with me, but all in all, Drew Allar looked good. His arm strength, his accuracy, while questionable at times, he showcased why he's a 5-star. Same thing with how he was able to run the read option. I mean, he pulled it at perfect times. There were times where I'm like, ooh, Singleton or Allen just got pummeled behind the line of scrimmage. And no, there's Allar running, getting a first down. You're going to need that kind of quarterback when facing the defenses of Michigan or Ohio State, because they will swallow up Singleton and Allen. But if you have that mobile quarterback who has that football IQ, that changes things. And that can open up the running back room to get some leeway, because now the defense is going to be more spread out, so on and so forth. So I liked what I saw at times from Penn State. There were other times where there were some concerns, certainly on the offensive side of the ball in the trenches. but I think the receiver concerns will be well worked out by fall. Penn State will once again have one of the nation's better wide receiver rooms. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're listening via Spotify, make sure to follow the channel. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.